Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the things to do or consider before you start homeschooling your kids. And I'm going to be reflecting on some of my experience as a homeschooler and also as a clinical therapist. So stay tuned and we'll get into it in just a bit. All right, so the thing about being homeschooled is that it's one of the things that is typically associated with having some type of wealth or status. And I know specifically in my situation, that wasn't necessarily the case. When you're thinking about homeschooling your kids, there's so many things to consider, but also make a plan for. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that would have been helpful in my experience when it came to how I was homeschooled and how my parents kind of navigated that landscape. Talk about and reflect on some of my experience as a clinical therapist working with families that do homeschoolers and really figuring out what works specifically for that family. So first and foremost, it's important to make a plan. Homeschooling can be really vast. I know unschooling is something that's also popular these days too, at least for some people. And so when it comes to having a plan, it's important to know your state laws around homeschooling. So for instance, in certain states, you are mandated to have at least 4 hours of instruction per day in order to be considered a homeschooling family. Some states also require you to register with the state before you are kind of officially allowed to start your homeschooling journey. So it's always important to kind of check with your state guidelines and to make sure that you're in compliance with all of those things so that you don't necessarily face any legal ramifications for homeschooling your kids. And so it's obviously a personal choice. And if you're making that decision, it's always good to have some structure around that decision and know what you want it to look like. Number two is finding a good curriculum. In our case, we didn't necessarily have a curriculum. My mom really was into freestyling it. And I can say from experience, that is not the right way to go. There is a lot of, I think, value in allowing kids to explore and find things that pique their interest. However, when it comes to certain aspects or certain topics or certain courses, there really is a need for more structure. And if you let kids learn on their own, yes, they're going to be interested in the material, but they may not know what to learn on their own. So it's important to have a good curriculum that gives you some structure so that you can know that your kids are following along with that and that they're making progress. In our homeschooling household, my parents didn't believe in grades because the largest room in the world is the room for improvement or something like that. So we were always told that we could always do better. And while that is and may be true in some circumstances, it was often difficult to find out what a rubric was or find out how I could actually improve because I wasn't given really detailed feedback. And if you only get a good job and not necessarily a letter grade, it can get a bit more confusing as far as what needs to be done in order to submit an assignment that meets the requirements. So find a good curriculum, something that you agree with, something that that you can follow along with and make sure that it's aligned with what a child in a traditional educational environment may be learning or studying right around that time frame. So that's a really important aspect of that because if you follow a curriculum, it's a lot easier to kind of do some spot checking and to make sure that it's the best fit for your homeschooling child versus kind of freestyling it, kind of picking and choosing, and then deciding that, you know what, I think this will help them, or no, this wouldn't help them. Get some structure around that. My third recommendation would be to keep religious studies separate. I know that is kind of a polarizing topic for a lot of people, but in my household, religious studies and homeschooling was definitely integrated in a very, very significant way. Think of it as being a bit more enmeshed than usual, I think, and I think that's really an understatement. In our household, we were kind of taught that the Bible was the #1 textbook in the world. So every aspect that we studied when it came to history, when it came to mathematics, when it came to social studies, there were books that tied everything back to the Bible. And while that can be helpful if you want your children maybe to become theologians, it doesn't necessarily translate the same way when they have to make decisions about their lives or when they go back into a traditional school environment like college or graduate school, where they may be tasked with finding out things and doing papers on things other than the Bible. So I think it's important to kind of keep those religious things and also homeschooling things separate. Not that religion doesn't have a place and that people can't find value in faith, but when they're enmeshed and integrated so much, it's going to be hard to actually go back into a more rigid or more rigorous academic environment if you don't necessarily have the same reference points as other people who have gone to a more traditional setting and done school that way. So I definitely recommend keeping those separate and just making sure that, your kids are raised the way that you want them to be raised and that your values are are shown through a lot of the curriculum that you choose, but I think those things should honestly be separate. Number 4, socialization. I think this is a big one, and it's become more talked about these days. Nowadays, homeschoolers have a lot of different options. Growing up, we lived in the country, in rural Alabama and in rural Georgia, so there weren't as many opportunities for socialization as we would have wanted, or I think my parents would have wanted. So a lot of it was just us in the middle of nowhere, playing games, having fun, going outside. But socialization is so important. And research shows us that children learn from the environment that they're in, but they also learn from their peers. And the absence of that also means that children can end up being socially awkward, like me. And, they can struggle with making some of those connections later on in life because they didn't necessarily get that repetition and that consistency that they needed in order to form strong connections and strong bonds with peers. So have a plan for socialization. A lot of times these days, homeschoolers have co-ops and they have opportunities where they can collaborate or work with other school systems where children or people in high school can play sports. They can be involved in extracurricular activities. They could do dancing. They can do recreational sports. There's a lot of different opportunities out there. So make sure that you are providing an adequate socialization plan for your children so that they're not just at home all day, every day, and that they have a chance to socialize with their peers and they don't feel so isolated from the rest of the world. I know growing up for me, we were pretty isolated. And one of the reasons for that was also, I think, tied to the religious aspect and really believing it was a us versus them mentality. And so I can't remember the number of times we were told that other kids were a bad influence. And so with that type of upbringing, you tend to have a lot of mistrust and distrust of other people, even though you don't know a lot about them. If you're always told, these people are bad influences, they're not part of our group, you don't need to be associating with them. As a child, you start to form pretty strong ideas about strangers and also about the importance of sticking with your core group and not really being in a space where you can explore other ideas or other beliefs or even be friends with people who may have other perspectives or other beliefs. So socialization is key. And last but not least, number 5, know when to stop and or supplement. Homeschooling is not an exact science and every kid is different. A lot of parents believe that they have enough information to homeschool the kid on their own. But the truth is that many parents aren't educators themselves. They don't necessarily have expertise in every single topic or subject matter. So it's important in those times to kind of recognize your own limitations and to be really intentional about supplementing some information. So for instance, maybe like math or when it comes to writing or English, making sure that your child has access to the resources that they need to be successful. So that may mean getting tutors. It may mean making sure that you're supplementing a lot of information that they're getting when it comes to the sciences and when it comes to certain types of certain areas of study that may be more complicated than others. So for instance, when I did biology in high school, my experience was so much different than a lot of people when they go through the course biology because it was actually like an open book test. So I had a biology textbook and then I had a book for test. And so all the stuff in the book, I just I read the textbook and then I put the answers in the textbook and sent in the test. So that didn't give me the opportunity to really get to know what it was for the field of biology. And there also was creationism, which, is a thing in and of itself, but it's not something that's generally accepted across the world. So when it comes to traditional education and reintegrating back into that educational system, there could be a lot of bumps along the way with that integration. So as a parent, it's important to supplement for things that you don't know or aren't aware of. I think that it's always important to kind of be future focused and maybe think about prioritizing things that are within the STEM field, because as technology is becoming more and more advanced, we're going to see, I think, a lot more opportunities when it comes to people, needing to have skills within the field of technology and tech when it comes to coding. Medicine is also a big one, engineering, making sure that your child has adequate education in some of those STEM fields in some way, shape, or form. Because I think over the long run, it really sets them up for success, but also helps them to be able to decide what they want to do moving forward. And they also have that strong science background that they can use in almost any setting, even if they do decide to do something more along the lines of a liberal arts or the social sciences. So that's pretty much all of my thoughts for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video.